In this tutorial, we're going to be looking at creating or baking textures out. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to create a high poly model and a low poly model. And we're going to bake all the details down from the high poly to the low poly. In this example, I'm just going to be using Maya, and I'm going to be using XNormal to actually do the baking on this, just to show you a free piece of software that can do that. So this is just an example here. I've just got this plane, just kind of moving around this so you can see. So this should look like it's got more depth to this, more of a 3D element. So these are kind of individual planks for a fence or something like that. That's how it should seem. But this is actually done through normal maps. So if I actually look at this mesh itself, you can see that this is just a one face on there if you look at my count. All of the other things are actually baked down through a high poly model. And in fact, that high poly model is this one here. So if you just put this to one side, extra bits to it there. So this is my high poly model that we're actually using to bake down this detail through the normal map. So let's have a look at how we can do this. So what I'm going to do is just do a new scene, and we'll go from there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with a plane. I'll grab this plane. I'm going to go straight into the channel box, and in the inputs, I'm just going to set this to be 300 by 300, so 3 meters squared. Press F to focus in on that. So I'm going to make 2 copies of this. One I'm going to have as my low poly, one I'm going to use as the basis for my high poly. And actually, because I want to get back to these inputs, I'm going to keep this and use this to make my high poly model from. So in fact, I'll go in and name this. Let's call this fence underscore high. Grab that, make a duplicate of this. So either do a Control D or an edit duplicate. And this one now, I'm going to go over and I'm going to put this in a layer. So in my channel box, down to layers, we can create layer from selected. So this creates a layer containing this object. Let's go in and name this. So I'm going to call this low poly. I will put an underscore there. You can't use spaces in these layer names or any other special characters. So we can't actually use a dash either. So a low poly is separated by the underscore, and an underscore is usually what I use, or a delineation between a capital. So you could have a capital P. We can't just click OK. We need to click save on that. And then what I can do is hide this. It doesn't look like you do anything, but we are hiding that, the low poly version. And just in my outliner, which is just here, I can go in and just give this a name as well. So I'll double click on this, and let's call this fence low. Okay. So now on my high poly, this is why I did it this way. I can still get to the inputs, whereas on my low poly, I can't do that because it's a duplicate without the inputs on there. So I'm just going to go into the subdivision. And what I'm going to do with this, I'm going to create 20 planks on this, each with, so it's going to be 10 centimeters width on each of these. So I'm going to go into the subdivision width and set this to 20. So I have our new polygons on there, new areas to work from. And I'm going to grab those in face mode. Just going to grab all of these. And I'm going to do an extrude on those. So we can go to our modeling tools and we can do extrude. Or you could use a Control E. I'm going to set up a bit of a thickness on this. So I'm just going to pull this up. I'm using Control, so I've held down Control here. So this is bringing up at smaller increments on this. So I'll just bring up to about 1. The important thing here is I'm going to get this keep faces together, and I'm going to switch that off so that we're working with all these individually. Now, before I deselect these, I want to do something with the selection just on these new faces. So I'm going to rotate these. So I'm going to go into the rotate tool. But if I do this, it's going to just kind of do something weird with them. It's going to rotate them all. I want to rotate them individually on their own faces here. So to do that, I just need to double click on this rotate tool and set the axis orientation to component. Notice where the gizmo goes to. It goes over one of these planes, and then I'm just going to go over, just in this case, the Z-axis, and I'm going to rotate that down. So we get something that looks like that. Okay, and they're going to be my individual planks. So now we've done that, I'm going to reset this back to object, which is generally what I have my rotation set to. I just needed to set that to component just to do that particular task. I only need these top faces for this. I don't need these side faces. So what I can do is just make sure I've got all of these faces selected just by dragging around them, still in face mode. So I just drag around those. And then I can do one of two things. I could go to select and do an inverse, Shift Control I. Or I can drag around this whole thing whilst pressing Shift down, which will do an invert selection as well. And there you see I've just got these sides selected. And we can just get rid of those by pressing delete. Okay, so we have that. Now, one of the things to actually create normal maps don't read 90-degree angles really well. So where we have this here, it won't really see this. What it does is it points an arrow out from the original normals, so out from the original poly face, upwards and outwards, and also down as well into the mesh. And if it sees, or if we have a 90-degree angle on that, it won't really see it. So we need to put a bit more of a face on this so that the normal projection can actually view these faces. So to do that, I'm going to grab all of these edges along here. These are going to be the ones that are going to actually create my normal map. And finally, that one there. Okay. And the easiest way to do this is to do a bevel, which will change each of these edges into a face. So in my modeling toolkit, I can just click on bevel. And there we have a bevel there. You could leave it at that, and you could round this off. There's a couple of things you could do. I'm just going to add a segment on that to give that a bit of roundness. Could always change that bevel amount, depending on the effect you want to create on that. If you want to create a bigger effect, you might actually want to take that off. Say it's just experimentation in this case. So I'm just going to put that on and leave that there. Now the other thing I want to do is press W to get out of that tool. If I was to bake this, so I'm going to bake normal maps and I'm going to bake ambient occlusion maps as well. So ambient occlusion maps are going to create occlusion. So they're going to create some shadow areas and some darker areas around this area of the mesh where one board goes underneath the other board. But over here on this end one, because this doesn't have another board in front of it, there won't be any occlusion there. And if we were to use this as a tileable object or a tileable texture, we're going to get areas on this side and this side where there isn't going to be any occlusion. So we need to add that in. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into my face mode. I'm going to grab just this one plank down here. And I'm going to make a duplicate of that, but in a different way. I'm going to go to Edit Mesh, and I'm going to duplicate there. Okay. So we do actually have a duplicate here. One of the easiest ways to get to this is in my outliner again. This is my fence high. I now have this in a group. If I click into this group, we have two parts of this. So we have the original poly surface and we have this new section here. So I'm going to grab that. Just with my move tool on, I want to be able to move this, but I want to move it in a specific manner. So actually what I want to do is move the pivot point and move it over here. So the pivot point is centered on this vertex point there. So to do that, the easiest way is to hold down D to actually activate the pivot, and notice that this kind of changes a little bit, the gizmo of that. I'm going to hold down V, which is going to activate the snap tool, and I'm just going to middle mouse drag and just move over here. And what that's going to do is just put the pivot point over this vertex point here. Okay, so now I have that. So I can move that out, and just to make this a little bit easier for me, I'm just going to go into shading on wireframe unshaded. And I just want to snap this in to this vertex point here. So again, V to snap to vertex points. I'm just going to move this And this is the x-axis. It's going to move this over the x-axis and snap that into there. It doesn't matter that it's not down on the z-axis, on the y-axis here. I need it in that position. So now I've got that. I'm going to do the same with the other side over here. So I'll just set my pivot point up again first. So this time I want my pivot point to be locked to here, so I can snap this point to the end of my other plank. So same thing, D and V press down, middle mouse, just go over that vert. Just because I kind of move your mouse around that vert, it'll snap to their position. And then we're going to duplicate this. So I'm going to do a Control D to duplicate. Just move this over. I've just press F to focus in on this. And again, I'm just going to use my V tool to snap and just go over this x-axis. I'm just going to snap it to that point over there. And that's just going to give me that little bit of ambient occlusion on both of those sides. Even though I'm only going to bake out on a plane of this size here, this will just give me those extra bits of shadow depth. So that's that bit done. I'm going to grab all of this now, and I'm going to merge this all together. So this is one object, just so it's easier to deal with. So I'm going to go to Mesh and combine that all together. And we have a history on this, so we've got this history building up. You can see it over here, especially with this group. So I want to collapse my history. So Edit, and we do a delete by type, history, or Alt-Shift-D, and we get rid of our history, and we also get rid of this grouping. I do need to rename this, so let's go back to our original name, fence_high, and there we have that done. Now, what I would do is I would also put this into a layer on its own, just to separate out my low poly and high poly objects, because sometimes you won't just have one mesh as your high poly. You may actually build your high poly mesh up or your high poly object out of several mesh types or several mesh parts, so you can actually keep those organized. So with this selected, let's go layers, create a layer from selected. Let's double click on this and let's call this high_poly. Again, no spaces. Save that. And now I can go between these two, so I have my low poly and my high poly, and I can switch these on and off. Just going to switch them both on for a second, because what I want to make sure I'm doing, this is really important for creating baked textures. My two objects, my two meshes, my high poly and my low poly, have to be in the same place. So they have to be over the top of each other. So I'm going to leave my low poly where it is, but just to make it so this reads a little better, I'm going to take this high poly and I'm just going to move it down sort of in the middle of this high poly mesh, so it's overlapping it, just something like that. Okay. If my high poly mesh was over here, this would not bake anything. So it's looking, basically it's projecting from itself outwards, up and down, and that's where it's looking for this other mesh to use to bake the normals out from that. So that would not work at all. So just be careful about that. It needs to be positioned exactly over the top. So we have that. So now what I can do, just add that again. I can now go through and I can just export these. So just using my low poly first, I'm just going to go to File, Export Selection. And I'm just going to go to my folder. So in here, I'm going to create a folder and I'm going to call this Exports. And it's a good idea to do this. This is in my, I've actually made a project folder here called Normals. And this. We need to export as an FBX. If you don't have FBX open, by the way, what you may need to do is go to Windows, Settings, Preferences, and Plugin Manager, and just make sure, if I do a search here, just make sure that this fbxmaya.mll is loaded and auto load clicked on. Let's do that again. Export selection, FBX. Let's go give this a name. So let's call this fence_low. I generally use the suffixes _low and _high. Oh, let's change my folder. Let me just go back to my folder. Okay, fence_low. Just check on your FBX if this is the first time you've actually exported something. Just in this include options down here, you have this geometry. I've just got my smoothing groups and my smooth mesh clicked on there. Let's export that selection. Hide that and click on my high poly. Select that and do the same. So export selection. Should go to the same folder. So I'm actually going to click on this to steal the name and then just change the suffix to high. Okay, there I have my 2 meshes ready to go. So in the next tutorial, as part of this series, what I'm going to do is open up Xnormal and I'm going to actually bake those textures out.